Welcome. Today we're going to look at continuous tone rendering as a technique. It's an extremely important technique for our drawing class. There are several rules that we need to abide by to have success with continuous tone rendering. And they're listed here and you can see them. One of which is keep your pencil dangerously sharp. If you want an example of what we're talking about having a pencil that is really, really sharp, and then we're going to look over how you get your pencil that sharp. You certainly don't want just kind of a regular kind of dulled out pencil. You need a dangerously sharp pencil for the continuous tone rendering technique. It's got to be sharp in order to do what we need to do. With continuous tone rendering, you create tones by repetition, by going over an area repeatedly. You're going to change the angle of your marks. So sometimes you may make marks this way, you'll change the angle of those marks, and over time you'll kind of feather the marks together. But we're changing the angle of the marks. The other thing we're going to do is change the angle of the pencil. You're going to hold the pencil the same way you do when you write, to get tones, but sometimes you're going to get a little more perpendicular to the page to really try to feed the tip of the pencil into the teeth of the paper to get your darkest tones. You don't want to bear down really hard because you damage the paper that way. If you bear down hard, it makes it shiny and it does a lot of damage to the illusion of your drawing, but it damages the paper for the technique, the way that we use the kneaded eraser. We see number 8 here is about you even out toned areas. You use an additive and subtractive method with continuous tone rendering using the kneaded eraser, and so you don't want to bear down really hard because you damage the paper for that part of the process as well. No smudging. You don't use your finger to smudge values around because you again, it damages the paper. Put some oil from your finger into it. It's also just generally bad technique and is easy to spot. So don't smudge, and also don't smudge accidentally. You can use a scrap sheet of paper or something to put between your hand and the drawing if you have some risk of accidentally smudging. For continuous tone rendering, you want to calibrate your tones. That means that you want to adjust as you get things down. A drawing is all relative, and so you have to kind of take a look and see how the tones relate to each other, and sometimes you have to make changes. So don't get married to things. Be ready to make changes and calibrate your tones. And then, like I said, even out toned areas, and remember that it's an additive and subtractive process. The kneaded eraser, this is a great tool. You can tap as a way to remove values. You can use it like a traditional eraser, but it is probably the best drawing tool that I introduced you to all term. Remember that continuous tone rendering, it means removing all evidence of the movement of the pencil. So, you know, this notion of repetition, and I often use the word feathering. You are making a lot of marks, but you wind up needing to feather those marks together. So the first thing here says keep your pencil sharp. And let's look here at a little illustration that might help us understand how you're going to get your pencil dangerously sharp. If you look here, you can see a little outline of steps here that you would take towards getting your pencil dangerously sharp. Step 1 is you just shave off the pencil down to some wood. So if I have this pencil, this is a short and older pencil, but we'll pretend like it's a new pencil and we're looking at that side. The first part of what you do is just take the paint and some wood off. And you stay low, and you just kind of, you're not trying to do much here. You're just, I think the word I use is shave. You're just kind of shaving some wood off of the pencil here. Not trying to get a whole lot missing. And I say about 2.5 inches here that you're trying to just expose the wood. So you get it to about this phase. Then the goal is you got the wood exposed, and you're just trying to now expose some graphite. And so you just take a little bit more off here. Again, not trying to take a lot off, just shaving it. And you expose the graphite. So you got the graphite showing now. And then you have a graphite exposed. And at this point, the idea is to really sharpen the graphite. So I just, and you may or may not notice it, but I kind of keep the pencil spinning in my hand as I go, and I'm just, again, shaving. I'm not trying to do a whole lot here. I'm not trying to take a whole lot off. I'm just kind of lightly shaving the graphite to get it to that kind of dangerously sharp resolution. I lost a little bit there. This blade might be getting kind of old and dull, but the idea is you're going to get the pencil to this kind of dangerously sharp point. Keep it spinning in your hand, and eventually you get it to this kind of dangerously sharp point. Those are the steps, and it takes some practice. And you can see there, I don't get it perfect every time, all the time, but I do like to sharpen a handful of pencils before I start drawing. That way I don't have to stop and sharpen a pencil while I'm kind of in the mode of working. So you're going to become a good whittler, and really sharpening with the X-Acto knife is the only way to get the pencil dangerously sharp. The other good thing about the X-Acto knife is that if you sharpen, you can resharpen it without shortening the pencil the way a pencil sharpener does. You use a pencil sharpener and it kind of eats up a couple inches of your pencil every time you sharpen it. With this method, you can resharpen your pencil without doing all that damage. So why do we want the pencil so sharp? Well, what we're trying to do is saturate. Continuous tone rendering is about saturating the tooth of the paper with graphite. So we have a little close-up side view here. This is a piece of paper sitting on a table, and really what you're trying to do is to get the graphite to cover all the teeth of the paper. You know, it's a little microscopic view here. So as you use your pencil, as you go over the drawing, say that's the tip of your pencil, you leave a little bit of graphite. Now if you have a dull pencil, it's rounded, then you can only get graphite onto the top of the teeth here, and you leave all these little white dots that are empty. So you keep your pencil really sharp, dangerously sharp, and you can get that pencil into the little gaps between the teeth of the paper, and you can saturate it all with graphite. So that's the idea here of having the pencil so sharp. The other thing that we mentioned is that you need to use different angles. So sometimes you have your pencil, you know, this way. Sometimes you have your pencil this way, and you can get the different sides of the teeth potentially. And then sometimes you get your pencil to come at a really more of a perpendicular angle, like I was talking about, and you can get the graphite way down into the teeth there. So when you're trying to get your darkest tones, you're really kind of trying to just think of it as feeding the pencil down into the teeth of the paper. If you are drawing and you bear down really hard, then what you wind up doing is just smashing the teeth of the paper. They become kind of crushed over top of each other, and you can't erase it at that point, and the paper gets shiny, like I said, and it kind of damages the process there. So really keeping the pencil sharp and doing continuous applications, varying the angle of the pencil, varying the angle of your marks, and you wind up being able to saturate the teeth of the paper with the graphite. So our exercises, got a little bit of feedback here. Our exercises, we're going to do it on 18 by 24 inch page here. And I want to show you a little bit of rendering and how I would go about doing the value bars. It's a good way to kind of do some demo of the rendering. So like I said, I like to keep several pencils sharpened. And sometimes it's a good idea to keep a number 2. This is an HB number 2 pencil, standard kind of pencil, which you can do a technique called glazing. Again, I've sharpened that the way I showed you, and we're able to use that as kind of an expanded part of our continuous tone rendering repertoire of materials. So for continuous tone rendering, we've been over kind of the materials, how you need to have them. Now let's engage in the actual process of doing it. So we just put down marks. This is going to be my darkest tone on the value bar, and I just start going from lots of different angles. This darkest tone is going to be a buildup of marks over time. So I just start coming at it from all types of different angles. I'm staying pretty low at this point. I'm still holding the pencil the same way I do when I write. You're not trying to change up. You're not trying to do this type of thing or anything. You're still holding it the way you do when you write. And I'm not bearing down particularly hard. I'm varying the different angles that I come from, and I'll start to get the angle of the pencil, really choking up on the pencil and making the angle change a little bit. One of the things you may not notice is that I'll actually spin the pencil while I'm working on this and try to get the pencil to kind of sharpen itself a little bit as I go along. So I'll rotate the pencil and try to keep working on different sides of the graphite and get the graphite to maybe sharpen itself a little bit as I go along. Putting down just more and more value in an attempt to just saturate the surface of the paper towards getting that the darkest tones. Sometimes I'll move around, come from different angles. Sometimes if I'm working not under a camera, then I'll rotate the pad around if I'm sitting in a single spot. And one of the things you may or may not be able to see from a distance at this point, there's always little white dots that are the teeth of the paper, and I'm trying to really feed the pencil in. So I go back with a little bit of a sharper pencil now, and I'll try to feed it into some of the little gaps and white dots and things to get my darkest tones. Really, for this darkest area, I don't want to really have I don't want really the white of the paper showing. This can be my darkest area, so it should be very, very dark. And I keep just coming at it from different angles. By the end, we don't want to see any movement of the pencil. We just want it to be a continuous, smooth tone. And we're starting to get there. This is a fairly dark tone, and it's going down all right. But next thing we're going to do is start to work on that next value bar. I'll start adding in tone here. And again, I know that the way that I get to that darker tone that's going to define that part of the value bar is going to be repeated application of value, and so I'm just kind of trying to just lay down initial tones, and I'm not real worried at this point about the specificity of the mark making. Kind of getting a buildup of darker tones on this side, and I guess I don't really want that so much. I want it to be kind of even. So maybe I'll give a little more emphasis to the other side to try to even it up a little bit. There's some places on this page where the dark is kind of grabbing a little bit more. I don't know if something was on this page previously making that happen, but that's okay. We can deal with it. It actually gives us an opportunity to talk about the kneaded eraser and the potential to use it as part of an additive and subtractive process. So I don't know how well you guys can see it on the camera, but there's some little darker moments right here. So you can actually take the kneaded eraser. This is how you recharge it. The kneaded eraser, you kind of pull it, it's like putty, and you pull it, and when it lightens up like that, it's recharged. And you can recharge it almost infinitely. But for a little area, like I'm getting right here where there's some little dark moments, you can form it into a point and just tap it down on there, recharge it again, make another little point. You can just tap it onto those areas and you can pull up small little amounts of value if you're getting little dark marks like those. The kneaded eraser is a really versatile tool. So that might even that out a little bit. And I kind of just continue putting some value down here. Obviously I want this one to be my darkest tone, so I might actually go back and add a little bit more graphite into this area to get it darker. And got this one pretty far along. I'll probably move on to my next tone. Now, the reality is we want this one to be pretty close to white. This part of the value bar is going to remain white, but we have to start thinking about our transitions and how we're going to get to kind of an off-white here. So I have to maybe start to work into a few of the boxes to make sure that I'm going to transition slow enough to get to the off-white. Now what I will do is I'll go too dark in this box. I'm going to try to get down enough graphite that I will have a continuous tone, and then I'm going to work back into that box, as you'll see with the kneaded eraser. So I'm working in all three of these at the moment. I don't want to lose the line there. So I may make a differentiation there. Again, I can see the graphite grabbing on to little things. I know I'll have to use my kneaded eraser to go back and redefine that area. Here's the line for that box. I don't want to lose it either. But I guess I decided to work on all three of these somewhat simultaneously so that I can get the transition of the values appropriately calibrated. That's a term we are using more and more to describe how you figure out the relationships. Can't get a great deal darker than that. Or we'll have the same value as our middle tone here. Not really bearing down very hard at this point, just trying to get the tones pretty well evened out. Now I'm going to work in with my eraser a little bit here and really model this notion that you're going to kind of calibrate what's going on. I'm can use it to clean up that line there. The line was getting a little dirty. Now recharging this eraser, really important thing to do. And then I like to kind of form it into kind of like a rounded, like a pad or a pillow almost. And then I'll go into this area and I'll just tap away some of the value here to lighten up that middle tone. And it starts to get full with graphite. I just charge it or recharge it again and make another little pillow. If I want to take some more off, I'll clean up the edges I can. But because I really only want this particular thing to be kind of an off-white. And it looks like what I probably need to do also is go into this next value bar, or value square, and lighten it up just a little bit also. So that notion of addition and subtraction is very important. Let me get a sharp pencil here. I'll work over this just ever so lightly. Try to even out the values. And again, probably gonna tap on it. And try to get the values evened up in a way that I'm happy with. Getting closer. Go right along that line. Remember, this is a value study, so the edges, the lines between these boxes are going to be created where the two boxes come together. There shouldn't be a drawn line between them. This is a value study, and so we are trying to create lines where two values meet. We're not drawing lines around things. Lines are going to be created where two values meet each other. Okay, so you know what, I'm even tempted just to do this box just a little bit because it looks a little knobby. The teeth of the paper on here, something's wrong with them, it seems like. I'm just going to tap that box a little bit so I can work over it a little bit more. We're trying to get the values to shift appropriately from box to box, and trying to keep everything neat. So I do try to erase any kind of overspill of the graphite that shows up. Having your pencil really, really sharp, particularly if the paper's acting kind of knobby like this one, that sharp pencil will do you a lot of favors. Okay, now I talked about the HB pencil as a tool. Now, at this point, I don't really want to put down a whole lot more graphite. I just want to smooth out what I've got. This graphite on this pencil is much harder. The point is much harder, and I can actually use it just to move the graphite around. It's already there. I mean, it puts down some graphite, but not like the ebony pencil itself. So I can actually use this thing. This is a technique called glazing. And I can use this just to kind of move around the graphite that's already down there to get these value areas a little more smoothed out. Particularly when the paper is given that kind of knobby effect. I can take this little point, and this point, because this graphite is much harder, it will stay sharper much longer. And kind of move this point around into some of those little textures of the paper there. Try to get the tone a little smoother, not have all those little white notches in. I can do it in the dark area also. And like I said, this pencil to a large degree is just moving around the graphite that's already there, really kind of distributing it into the teeth of the paper, which you get really much smoother tone, continuous tone, using this glazing technique kind of late in the process. I might do the same thing in all the boxes to get them to smooth out a little bit. Continuous tone rendering is very, very technique driven. You know, you have to kind of work at it, you have to give it time, and if you don't get it right, it's your illusions, your drawings just don't function well. And so it is important to give it some time. You can see that we're just drawing blocks here, but I'm giving it quite a process to make it come out just right. Of course, I'm using this as an instructive device, so I'm trying to make sure I kind of expose all the different technical tools that are available to you. But it is a process that takes time and concentration, and really attention to technique is very important. So we got a pretty good range of tones there. I might be inclined to lighten up that box a bit, but I'm probably not going to at this time, just for the time management of the demo. Now, the second thing we're going to do, just practicing continuous tone rendering, is the blended value bar. And we really want these values, the values are going to line up here. We want them to match up. With this bar, this is going to be a blended bar, and you're going to, rather than have the distinct squares, it's just going to kind of blend in. They're going to blend into each other. So I'm just putting down some value initially. So it's getting dull. It doesn't look that dull to you, but it is getting dull. We need it very, very sharp, and so we can actually take the kneaded eraser, like I was showing you. You can take the kneaded eraser at this point. I mean, take the X-Acto knife and just barely, not really trying to shorten the pencil at all. Just barely sliding it across the graphite, getting it back to a very, very sharp point. And it should really, the very tip of it should be very, very sharp, because we're trying to feed that tip down into the teeth of the paper. I think there's another one I might need to sharpen up a little bit. And obviously, you can really make a mess with sharpening your pencil, so I like to get a piece of paper or something like this so I can catch that little graphite scrapings and then put them in the trash can. But we get these things sharpened back up. We'll get this out of the way. So, got those pencils resharpened, and they'll give me a little bit more ability to not get all the little white texture of the teeth of the paper showing up here as I try to get this darkest area in here. Change the directional marks and really determine. I often use to sneak up on my darkest tones, that I don't really try to force them into existence early on, but just kind of repeated attention to an area, and I can get a good smooth tone. It's not really complicated how to do this. It just takes time. A little bit of grit, a little bit of patience. You kind of got to stay with it, and that's how you get this technique to really work. The great thing about this technique is the ability to really make some really fantastic illusionistic drawings, but like I said, it's not rocket surgery, but it is something that takes some time and commitment to the appropriate process. Some folks decide they're going to smudge with their finger. That looks horrible and damages the ability to engage in the process in additive and subtractive approach. So you don't want to do that. So I'm kind of generally trying to map in some of the same values that we had before, but things are supposed to blend, so I'm not really drawing those distinct hard lines between the areas this time, because by the end of it I really want a smooth blend, but I also want to correspond with the values that are up there. I do continue to kind of try to rotate the pencil as I go, so it to some small degree sharpens itself as it goes along. may try to get a sharper pencil to feed into some of these little knobs and valleys and stuff. I think changing the angle is particularly important to get the marks to all feather together in the end. And I'm probably way too dark here. I have a hard time getting the lightest middle tones without using the kneaded eraser. I need it. To get those middle tones. So I'm going to try to start to work back in the other direction here. I'll use the kneaded eraser. I'll start to just kind of tap away some of these values. Again, stretching it, forming it into a little pillow, and then kind of just tapping to pull off light areas of value. It gets kind of filled up there. You gotta stretch it out and recharge it. Like I said, I think these erasers can last you a lifetime. They can just kind of be infinitely recharged. But just kind of tap it till it gets full, and then go again. And I think that rounded shape, making that kind of pillow shape, keeps it from leaving too many marks behind. It just kind of has those rounded sides that makes it a little bit better for creating some smoother, not leaving marks behind. I'll work back over some of this again. Additive and subtractive. Putting value down, taking it up, putting some more back down. We just don't want any real distinct transitions. We want to kind of think about how the values line up with each other over here. I think one of the things I want to do is really use this glazing technique again. I got all this kind of knobbiness. You can kind of see a comparison here. This is, you see all the little white negative spaces here. So I'm going to go back in with this thing and try to. Now I'm not bearing down very hard. Just kind of trying to get the angle in such a way that it feeds the graphite into the little textures of the paper. Sometimes I try to solidify some of the edges, but right here I see so much the white of the paper, little gaps between the teeth. I really want those to go away. And as this thing slides across, it just deposits a lot of that graphite that's already there down into the little gaps and creates a much smoother or more continuous tone, if you will. And we'll keep working it on down. Now I know if I bear down really hard, I'm going to damage the paper, so I really do stay very, very light. If I'm trying to get a particular area dark, I will just kind of try to make the angle of the pencil a little more severe. But I'm never going to bear down very hard because I know it'll damage the paper, and I know I'm going to have to work back in with the kneaded eraser to get it more subtly blended. So much smoother up here now, but I kind of worked my dark too far down, too dark, and so I'm gonna begin using the kneaded eraser to track everything back up. I'm gonna start tapping, tap. Start lower and just kind of keep working back up higher. And it is an ongoing balance of addition and subtraction. But if you really want a smooth continuous tone, you kind of have to give into this notion that it's going to be several layers of rendering, not just kind of one and done. That it's going to be, if you want to get it really smooth, you're going to have to give it a little more layering of the application of the medium. And then I'll probably take my yellow pencil. And I know there's a lot of graphite down there. I'm just kind of trying to glaze over it now and move it around. Maybe I'll try a slightly different angle. Particular areas that need to be attended to, I will do that. But I can usually count on the fact that my lightest middle tones, the last thing I'm going to do down there, is not going to be with the pencil. It's probably going to be with the kneaded eraser to get the lightest middle tones. Although we got a pretty good gradation right there. I might give it the lightest, a little skid with the glazing technique, just to try to get that transition. Change the angle just a bit. Some of these areas look like they could be treated a little bit more, but for the sake of time, I probably better start to wrap up this demo. I'll do one last kind of workout from down here, trying to get the transition from the lightest area to the light middle tone. And we're getting there. Okay, so that's kind of the demo on continuous tone rendering. It is a process and really demands you give good attention to technique and be quite a bit aware of the surface of the paper. We'll drag it down here a little bit closer and see if we can get any better look at the surface of the paper there. So you see the little white dots in between the values, and we really try to minimize that as much as we can. We see edges are created where the values come together, and we got the two value bars there, and they should really correspond with each other as much as you can get it to work. Okay, that's a good introduction to continuous tone rendering, and I look forward to seeing your drawings and your attempts at this technique.